Assalamu alaikum and hello. Today I'd like to talk about front-end development, more specifically modern front-end development. And let's be honest, it's a bit of a mess. We have created essentially complexity on top of complexity, and now we have this big ball of mud, and it's constantly changing and evolving. And of course, more importantly, it's constantly breaking. When we contrast this to back-end development, we have code bases that are 10 years plus, and they will compile just fine. We don't really have that same level of confidence when it comes to front-end development. So, sometimes when you just have so much technical debt, you just feel like just throwing the whole thing in the bin and starting all over again. Well, I had that question. It was just as a thought experiment. Well, what if we did exactly that? What would happen if we just threw away all of Node.js and npm and literally started from scratch? And yeah, so I did that little experiment. And so today I'd like to show you just essentially from first principles what that could look like. Can we still build reasonably, can we build single page applications or modern single page applications just essentially almost from first principles without that baggage of Node.js and NPM and all that ecosystem? So, okay, let's open up a terminal and I'll make this full screen. So let's just make this a little bit larger so you guys can follow along. Okay, so as I said, we'll go from first principles. So let's create a project. So I'm going to call this vanilla. Okay, let's go into that project. Now, obviously that's empty. There's nothing there in that folder. The first thing that we'll need is some sort of web server. So in the Node.js world, typically there would be a development web server, but we can just use a real web server. So what we'll do is let's create a bash script. So I'll call this server, and let's edit that. So okay. So what we'll do is we'll use Docker to essentially run a real server, and we'll put that into -it, which is interactive, so we can do Control-C and stop that. We'll do --rm, which basically means we want to, as soon as the container is closed, it just removes that container. We don't have dangling containers and orphaned containers sitting around wasting disk space. And what we'll then do is volume mount. And what I like to do is I like to put all of the source code in a folder called src, which is a source code folder. We'll map that source code folder to, so I'd like to use Nginx simply because I'm a little bit more familiar with that. And then if we volume mount that into a specific folder, a public folder, then that should host those static assets that are in there. So I believe it's something like usr share and nginx. I think it's HTML. And we'll make that read only. So, that's fine because it's only pushing in one direction. And we'll also bust out the port 8080. So on the host itself, it'll be port 8080. Internally, of course, that's mapped to port 80 on Nginx. And so we have our Nginx container. And what we'll do is we'll use the Alpine image simply because that's a very lightweight image. So let's do that, which is fine. So we have our, let's have a look. We have our script, server script, which is just a wrap around Docker, and just makes things a little bit easier. Of course, we do need to make that add executable permissions. So let's do that. So yeah, now okay, that now has permissions to execute, which is fine. So let's go ahead and create our source directory. Let me just clear that, sorry. src source directory. If we go into the source directory, okay, clear that. So yeah, in our source directory, we have nothing there. So we will create the first entry point, which is the index.html. Yeah, so we have that there. And in fact, let's just put something in there just so that we know everything works. So let's put a h1 hello hello world, why not? So let's close that off. H1. So we'll close that off. So now we have obviously just the index in the source directory, and in theory, if we boot that up, so actually, sorry, we should where are we? Yeah, we're in vanilla. Okay, yeah. So if we run this, okay, I did not like that. I think let's have a look. Server. So I think it may be it might be two dashes. Yeah, I can never remember if it's one dash or two dashes. Let's try two dashes and see if that now runs. Oh yes, of course. Yeah, I know I'm doing Docker run. Docker run. Yeah, I think I was missing that top level command. So if we run that now. Oh yes, of course. So I don't have that image at the moment, but it's now downloading that image. Of course, if you do have that image downloaded, it will download that. It will not download that. And if I got the incantation correct, it should mount to the src directory and host whatever's in there onto port 8080. So that looks like it's running. So if we go back into our browser and let's open up localhost port 8080. Hello world. So that's brilliant. That's exactly what we expected. So we know that that part of it is working. So okay, let's open up another terminal. Let's make that full screen, make that a little bit bigger. And what we'll do is we'll go into that vanilla project and we'll boot up Visual Studio Code. Of course, you don't have to use Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever editor that you feel comfortable with. We no longer need this one, so that's fine. We'll make this full screen. Let me get rid of this thing over here. So yeah, as I mentioned, we have our bash script. You know, we need a web server, and why use a development server when we can just use a real web server? We've got our source directory and we have our index file with the hello world in there. So okay, let's go ahead and start creating an actual application. So I like to organize things into folders. It's just easy to reason about the actual project. So I'll create a new folder called assets. And in here, I will create a new folder called lib. So all of our libraries, any external libraries can go in there. And we, on the top level in the assets, we will create a new file. And this is our main entry point, and we'll literally call it main.js. So in main.js, actually, before we do that, let's actually start in the HTML. Let's get rid of all of this. Okay, so let's create a skeleton. So we've got that. We need the head. Yeah. Let's create a title. We'll call this stop using NodeJS. And yeah, let's have the body as well. So we've got the body there. And okay, so now we need to include that main JavaScript. So we need a script tag. So we'll do that. And the important part here is to use ES modules. So the type will be set to module, and then the actual source itself will be / assets main.js. So we can now close that off. Okay, so if we now go into the actual main.js script, and let's just make sure everything is actually wired up and working, and we can do that by doing this. So if we save that, and if we go back here and then refresh, that should. Okay, that's brilliant. So that's now showing us hi. Obviously, that means that the JavaScript is working, which is brilliant. Now, as I mentioned, in terms of building out sort of a single page application, we could leverage web components, which is native to modern browsers, and of course you can go ahead and write just raw web components by hand. Of course, that isn't the most productive because soon it becomes very boilerplatey, and there's a lot of, it's not as ergonomic, shall we say. And for that reason, I found a project, and I'll bring that up because we do need that library, and it's called a lit element. So if you haven't heard of lit element, essentially what this does is it is a thin wrapper around web components. But although it's a thin wrapper, it is just a very small library, a very lightweight library. It still gives you all of those nice things that as modern frameworks that we're used to, such as Angular, React, and Vue, where you have nice templating and we can do declarative and reactive binding. So it provides all those nice things that we are sort of generally used to. But as I said, it is a small wrapper around web components. Under the hood, it's actually using web components, and this is why I was quite drawn to this. So let's go grab that. Of course, now because as I mentioned, we're doing it with Node and npm, so we're not going to use npm or any of that machinery. Instead, we're just going to get the actual bundle itself. So we can do that. We can grab this one here, which is because they've got two bundles. They've got the core, which I think has fewer things, and then you've got the all. So I wasn't sure. I'm just going to get the all, which has everything in there that we would need. So I'm going to save that. So save link as. So let's do that, and let's put it into our libs directory. So let's actually, I don't like calling it having all this stuff. I'm just going to call it lit.js, and let's save that. So let's have a look. I think that's now saved. Yes, now that's downloaded. So if we go back to our projects, yeah, so under libs we have lit.js. Okay, so now what we'll do is we will create our first web component using this lit library. So let's do that. So we'll do import, and there's a few things we need. We need a lit element. This is actually from this library, and we need HTML. It's also from that library as well. And then we'll just do from, and it is assets / libs. Libs. Actually, yeah, we can do this. So assets libs / lit.js. Actually, we might need that dots here, which is fine. Okay, so we have that, and then we're going to create. Let's just create a hello world extends lit element. Let's do that there. Okay, and we just need to sort of override the render function, and then we're going to say return, and we want to return HTML, do the backticks, and we want to, let's close that there. We want to have a tag h1 hi from web components. So let's close that off. Yeah, that's fine there. Now we need to, now that we've created this hello world custom web component, we need to actually register it. So we use that. So use I think it's custom elements. Yeah, custom elements define, and then we need to give that custom element HTML tag name, and it must, one of the specifications, it has to be all lowercase. And it must contain a dash in between. So we'll say something like hello, or just say, I don't know, my greetings or something like that. My greetings. My greeting. And then we'll put hello world. Well, actually, no, look, yeah, let's just say hello dash world is the custom component. And we'll say that there. Now, all we need to do is if we go into our index again, we can now actually use this hello dash world component and close that off. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So we have this hello world component, which is a custom component, and it behaves just like a normal HTML tag, but it's defined in JavaScript using web components. So it's a native. It becomes like a native HTML element. So we've got hello world there, we've defined it, which is all fine, and we've done the templating, and we return hi from web components, and then we've obviously placed it here. So let's have a look. Let's see if that has worked. We don't need this tab anymore. So if you refresh, if we've done it correctly, that should say hello. So let's inspect something. Obviously, I've broken into the code. Let's have a look. Okay, yeah, it's probably, yeah, okay. I think I know what it is. It's to do with in the HTML. I think I need to do this. Well, actually, if I do that, and then it's to do with the path, and I think, yeah, I think I need to do absolute paths like this. So if I save that, let's try loading again and see if this works. Yeah, of course, yeah, it's to do with the path. I hadn't got the paths quite right, so that's my my apologies there. But okay, this is brilliant. So now we have essentially custom web components building, which is good. You know, we can do templating, and that's brilliant. But of course, with templating, it can be dynamic, and we can nest templates, and that's really kind of the power of sort of modern front end development is the fact that we can nest components, and then obviously we can pass down properties. So you know, there is some reactive, you know, it's reactive in that sense, and of course, events that happen underneath get bubbled up all the way up to the top, which is the kind of modern single page application development experience. So what we'll do, and obviously to build a single page application, what we would have to do is we'd have some sort of top level component, which is, you could think of it as the master layout. And each of the pages themselves would be a component, and then obviously those components can have subcomponents and so forth. And then obviously we would have to take a look at the URL and simply have some sort of a crude router that looks at the path and then maps that to some component that it dynamically loads in and changes some of the properties of the top level. But before we get to that, let's just show let's just do a simple property binding. So okay, so what we'll do is we do static properties, is equal to, so we'll say name here, for example, and we have to provide a type for this. So we'll say the type is string. And once we have that, we also need, once we have a property, we do need to sort of initialize that. And we do that through the constructor. So we override the constructor, we have to call the constructors like super method. And then once we've done that, we can then set, we can initialize that. Now, initially what I'll do is I'll set that to an empty string. And I'll show you why that's important. So from hi from web components, and then we'll just say hi there. And in here, because it's interpolated template, we can actually now reference that name. So you can say hi there name from web components. Now, initially, if we save this, if we reload this, that should be empty because we've set that to an empty string, which is correct. Now, if we go back. And the cool thing is, if we go into the actual HTML, we can pass in properties. So we can say name is equal to Anha. Or yes. So if we save that now and then go back and reload this, yeah, it's there. Hi there, Anha, from web components, which is fine. Okay, so that's good. That's showing that we can pass in properties and things like that. So, okay, now we'd like to extend this and actually let's start building out a essentially a single, the main mechanics of a very basic rudimentary single page application. So of course, we just need to do a little bit of refactoring. So the first thing, instead of calling this hello world, we will call this our main layout because we need this main layout at the top. And once we've changed that, of course, we will need to change it here in terms of when we're registering that element, and we will call this main layout. So it's just sort of following that kind of naming construction. And one of the things we will change, so obviously we've got that there, is we will change this to page because this we want actually to pass a page into that. And what we'll do is so it says this name, so we need to change this. Of course, we'll change this to page, and we will call this home page as a default. So it will set that if it is not set, then we'll just default to home, go to the home page essentially. So in here, if I get rid of this, we'll start again on here. So what we'll do is we will have a h1, and let's just put some in here. Let's just put some arefs for the actual link. So sorry, aref href is equal to, and we'll have something like along the lines of / for the home page, and we'll call this app link because it's an application link. Because although they are links, we are gonna have to essentially hijack, because this is how modern single page applications work, because they're all virtual. These links don't point to real directories on the disk. So we need a way to differentiate these links from other links, and so using an attribute on the element, we can later on in our crude router that we'll build out, we need a way to be able to differentiate that, and so that's why we tag it. It's a bit like a Vue router in Vue.js. So so we've got app link there, and then now we'll just say home. So that's the home page. So we'll close that. And then we can copy and paste and create another one. Let's create another one called counter. We'll do a little counter example, which would be kind of cool. So there's the counter there. And so yeah, we've got two pages. We've got an app link, the home page and the counter. So now we need to start building out the home, all the various different pages components. So what we will do, actually before that, what we need to do is obviously close off this h1. So we have these links here. And main layouts, of course I need to update that. So as I said, it's best to always go step by step. We'll get rid of this page property because it's going to get set anyway, and we'll call this main dash layout, and then make sure we close that off. Okay, that's fine. So let's go back here, and in theory they should just have these two, home and counter. Of course they're not going to work now because we still have to write the code for that, but again, small steps, we go step by step. So we've done that. Yes, we've got that there. So what I like to do for pages, again, I said you don't have to do it like this. This is just how I like to organize things. So we'll create a folder called pages, and in there we will have our various different pages. So we'll have our home page, and then we will have our counter page. So of course this is just showing as an example. So back to our main page. Now, one of the things that we will need is unsafe HTML, because what we're going to do is, so when we're passing this page property that gets passed down, we're going to dynamically create these custom elements. So of course that means we're dynamically generating HTML, and because of the way that lit element library works, it doesn't like you constructing dynamically constructing dynamically from variables or properties, using that to generate HTML, because there could be security issues there. So that's why. But we have a mechanism, an escape hatch, which is the unsafe HTML, that allows us to do things like this. So we'll use that. So okay, let's have a look. So in here we will do something like unsafe HTML, and in here we will then have another a nested string interpolation. So what we'll do is this, and in here we'll do this.page, and we'll close that off as this.page. So hopefully that's understandable what's going on here. We as I mentioned, or not mentioned, we have our links, if you like, on the top here, and then underneath that we inject a custom HTML component, but we do that dynamically. So obviously at the moment this.page will be home page, and then home page will go in. Then of course, if when we build out our simplistic router when we build out a router code, that will do that based on the URLs, obviously, and that will be based on hijacking the links that we click. So we'll do this, as I said, step by step. So of course, now that we've got this in here, we will need to import in those pages. So that we will have to do import, and it's going to be /assets pages /home.js as one of them, and then we need the other one, which is counter as well. So that will pop those in there. Now let's do the home one. So we will do imports lit element and HTML from it's going to be /assets libs /lit.js, and then we're going to do class home page extends and lit element. And for this one, we're just going to do the render function. That's going to return HTML, and we'll do something like, we'll keep it very simple, home page. And let's close that off. So it's done. And then we need to custom elements.define that, and we'll say this is home. We have to remember that component naming is also the home page, and we'll pass the actual class there. So that's done. Okay, now we've done the boring boilerplate code. We can copy that. We can go into counter. We can just paste that same thing, and here we'll say this is the counter page. Now, okay. Now we need to make sure this is actually working in principle. So if we go back, the home page should load the home page and say home page. If we've done it correctly, no, we clearly haven't. We've broken something. It says here, custom element registry home page has already been defined as a custom element. Okay, yes, so this is essentially saying that the home page has been defined twice, so there's probably too much copy pasta going on. So if we look at the home page, that's home page. If we look at the counter, yeah, okay, so I have not changed it there. So that this should actually be counter page. Counter page. So let's save that. We have saved it. Let's go across. Let's see if it runs. Okay, brilliant. And we can see home page is being loaded in because that is what we've defined as the default. We can confirm that if we do go into the main.js and we change this to counter page as opposed to the home page, and if we save that, hopefully that should say yes, counter page. So clearly we can inject in or the page property. If we change that, clearly it will pull in the other component. And now what we need to do is we need to build a very rudimentary a router, so that when these things are clicked, what we'll do is we will essentially change the main layout custom component, and we'll go in, we'll change that property. By changing that property, it will automatically load the correct component. So okay, let's do that. So I think before we do that, we need to put an ID here so that we're able to pull this pull this element. So we'll call this main layout. Okay, so this has an ID of main layout. Let's sort of say main layout. Let's save that, and we will create within the assets. We will create a new file, and we'll call this router.js. So okay, we're building a router. One of the things we need is obviously routes. So that's just an object of essentially a path to a particular page component that we want. So here we'll say / is actually home-page, and if we had / counter, well that's going to be essentially counter counter-page. That's really our routes, and what we'll do is we'll export a function, export default, and not actually export function, render routes. We'll call it render routes, and in here what we want to do essentially is to so let's get the actual page. So the page will be well, the routes, and from there we want the location.path name, and obviously if that's empty, we do need something like a page not found or something. So just sort of a default if it doesn't. So we will have to create that page not found in the pages. So we actually might as well do that. Okay, let's create that page not found. So let's create a new file. Page not found. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll just copy from another one of these page ones and just change it around. So that's going to be page not found. Okay, and we'll just do something like 404. Okay, so that's done. Of course, we'll need to load that in that page as well, because otherwise it wouldn't be defined. So let's just do that here. Okay, so that's done. Now let's go back to our router. Okay, yes, actually that needs to be a const. Okay, so that's fine. And we'll grab our main layout from the document. So we'll do get element by ID, and that's the main layout. Okay, and of course we need to make sure that does that element actually exist, and so let's do that. And if it does exist, all we need to do is set the attributes, which will be the page attribute, to the one that we pull out from here. So really that you know, it's very crude, but that's enough in terms of a mechanism for in order to get a you know, the routes working for a single page application. All we're doing is essentially we have this key value pair object. We take the path name and we use that as a key, and obviously that's, you know, paired to a a page component that we essentially just switch out the attribute. It's fairly straightforward, and it doesn't need to be anything more complicated than that. Now, of course, in a production grade system, you would want to have sort of regex based matching, and it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to you know, to modify this to start to use regex as opposed to just looking at doing a key lookup. So yeah, it could be very easily extended. Okay, so now that we have that, we do have to handle two events. One is when the user clicks on the browser back and forth buttons, and another time is the actual links itself, the actual A link. So let's do that. So to handle the browser back and forth, that will be at the window level. So we'll just add an event listener, and that's the actual pop state. So that's that, and then all we do is just call the render routes function. Now let's do the other one. Let's add an event listener, and this is going to be the click event. And so there is a slight issue when using these shadow DOMs, because normally we do things like e.target, but we can't do that when we have shadow DOM, these web components, which are actually in the shadow DOM, because the events can't really cross those event boundaries. But we can use something called the composed path, and that will just essentially give us a flattened list. And at the bottom of that list, or the very first element in the list, will be, or should be normally, the element that actually caused that, triggered that event. So obviously we have to do a bunch of checks. So we'll take that link, those components, and then we'll just check on the length. And of course that means if it's not empty, if it does exist, we'll let the we'll let the A component, if you like, we'll pull that from the first element, and then we have to do some further checks. So a dot node name, if that actually is an A element, an anchor type element, and also importantly, if the attributes. So yeah, what we're doing here is we're doing two checks. Number one, we're making sure that this element right at the bottom of that list, that first element, it really is an anchor element, and also that the app link, which is if we look at our main, these links, we have set this attribute called app link. So we're just checking that it has that, because we want to hijack those click links, but of course we don't want to hijack all links, because they could be just normal links. So that's why we use this custom property just to differentiate between the two. So if we go back to our router, once we have that, we can now prevent the default action, which is the default action is for the browser to actually go to that link. But in this specific case, when we have that app link, we don't want to redirect. Instead, what we want to do is we want to actually call the history web API, and we're going to push a state in there. So, and the state that we're going to push in really is the href into there. So as if they clicked into that link, and then we simply call the render routes function, and that should be enough. That's a very minimalistic router, but that should be enough to, for our single page application. So if we go back to our main function, we should now be able to import that in. So import render routes, and it's going to be .js, and of course we do need to call initially call that function, because at the moment we've only set that in when they click on the links itself. So if we've done everything correctly, if we reload everything, and we then click on counter, there you go. We now have a fully working, and if we click on home again, and in fact the backlinks and the forward links will work as well. So that demonstrates it. It is a very crude router, for example. It's not industrial grade, but the basic mechanics are there, and it does work. That's an entire single page application. Obviously it's from very first principles, and it's a very basic version of it, but you can definitely expand on that. Okay, so let's implement this counter page. So okay, and this will just give a basic idea of if we can do reasonable single page application, in terms of what we're used to. So the first thing we'll do is create a static property. So we'll set the static property. We need some sort of counter, so we'll do that. For us, that type will be a number type, because it's just a very, very basic primitive. Then we need to override the constructor, so let's do that. So yeah, we need to call the super function, and then initialize the count to 0. So let's do that there, which is fine. So now we need two functions to mutate this static property. So we'll create let's create one called plus, and this will be simply as this.count, and we can increment. We can just simply increment that number, and of course we can do the inverse of that. So let's do the inverse, which would be minus. And in this case, we'll flip that backwards there. Okay, so now we have our property, and we have functions to mutate that, and now we can bind that variable or property. Sorry. So let's do that there. So to create a bold element, we'll say something like total count, and then we'll inject this.count, and then close that off. So that's there. And now, of course, we're going to let's add some button elements. and then bind it to those functions so that when they click on it, it will call those functions, and those functions then will then mutate that variable. So let's do that. So we have a button, and we'll use the click handler and then inject in the actual function. So this dot plus, and then let's give it this label of plus. I mean, it could be a label of anything, and we've closed that off. And then what we'll do is just to save a little bit of time, usual copy paste, copy that and put that button here, and then we will have the inverse of that, which is dot minus, and then yeah, we can say something like minus here, which is fine. Now, if we've done everything correctly, let's have a look. So we've got the static properties of count. We call the constructor, call the super function, initialize it to 0, and then we have two functions, which is the plus and the minus. Then we're sort of binding that data in the actual HTML template, and then we are attaching the two functions on the click handler. So okay, let's have a look. If we go back and let's reload our page, go to our counter page, right? So yeah, we've got our counter page with the total count of 0 and our two buttons, and if we click them, in theory, yep, they go, they work. And of course the opposite works as well. Now I've not implemented, you know, a little check to make sure it doesn't go below 0, but anyway, it's just to demonstrate the ease and, you know, the similarity to, you know, modern development of single page applications. We follow a very similar pattern, but we're using native web components. And of course, this approach, you know, we're just using static files. We're not going to have issues like supply chains attack, or even more recently that has dropped was React to Shell, which is a serious vulnerability, and it's not the first, it's not the last, and I suspect there's going to be we're going to see more and more attacks. But of course, if you do away with the Node ecosystem and NPM, we won't have those issues, because it's simply not possible to have those issues because we're not using any of those toolings. We're just editing files. And that's it really. We're editing files, and then those are the exact same files that are pushed to the client. So there's a one-to-one mapping, a one-to-one relationship. So yes, and really it just demonstrates. I know it may not appear, just obviously it doesn't look all that fantastic, but of course you add CSS, you let your imagination run wild, and just imagine that you've added all the CSS and everything. You could even use Tailwind, for example. It would not be a problem. And you know, if you look at this, and actually if you look at for example, the network, let's have a look at the network tab. I'm going to delete everything, and I'm just gonna expand on this. And if I refresh it and have a look at that, and we can see it's like 31 kilobytes. And if you know, the actual 29 kilobytes of that is actually just the lit library is obviously taking the bulk of the code here, but it's not, we're not talking hundreds of megabytes. And of course there may be arguments, well, why would I want to do this approach? Because obviously with a bundler, all of this, you end up with just a single call, because all that JavaScript is bundled into a single file. Well, with that optimization might have been fine with HTTP 1, but if you think about it, for HTTP 2, having separate files is actually better, simply because number one, you get caching off the back of it automatically, because if one of those files changes, then the browser will be able to detect that through e-tags and all this kind of stuff. The web server will actually send, you know, when that page was last updated, and based on that, the actual browser will only call if a page has changed. So we get this sort of nice, a nice caching. That's already a caching validation mechanism that's already baked in fact. Of course, now, you know, in terms of modern tooling, we have similar things where we do this thing, we take the bundle and then we chunk it, and then it's a lot more extra machinery, but we're essentially doing the same chunking in some ways, if you think about it, just by letting just by files being files, essentially. Of course, so everything that I haven't really delved into a lot more what could be done, but you know, there could be, in terms of pushback and arguments, a lot of people would say, well, First of all, there's no hot module reloading, and of course, and that's true. There is no hot module reloading every single time. You have to hit the reload and reload the entire page again to go through. But I would say that that from an end user perspective, who's going to come to that website, that they're not going to care whether you have hot module reloading or not. That's more of a developer nicety. For me personally, I can live with that hot module reloading. That's not the end of the world. We developed websites, before hot module reloading existed, and it was perfectly fine. We were able to just change some code and hit the reload. As I mentioned, we don't have any of that huge machinery. We don't have to do transpilation. We don't have to build. There is no build step here. There's literally no build step. You edit a file, and those are the files that end up on the web server. So it's direct, and I have more confidence in these sets of files to last for the next 10 years. If I came, that this project in this style will work in 10 years time than I have for any other front end project. I can't have those same level of assurances or guarantees. So okay, I know the real actual criticism will be, well, all of this, what I've just this in this demonstration that I've done, depends on ES modules, and web components, and older browsers, and I mean really older browsers, don't have that. But we have to ask ourselves, how old are we talking about? Because if we look at if you look at the global stats, I think it's you'd have to check as of writing. I think it's somewhere near 95%. So what that essentially means that if you have 100 users, 5 of those users, this will not work. ES modules and web components won't work for them. So all of this tooling that we're doing, all of this backwards compatibility in terms of using Node and transpilation and all this kind of stuff, we're doing all this effort for just 5% of the users. Now, obviously, it depends on your project and it depends on your requirement. You may be able to live with that, with that. In some cases, that 5% may be too much. That might, you need 100%, and in those cases, fine. In those cases, you will of course have to use transpilation and in order to support that diminishing number. And of course, the further time goes on, that number is just only going to get smaller and smaller. But for the vast majority, and I mean for the vast majority for web users, it's going to work completely fine. And this is why I think we really have to ask ourselves. I think it's time to reset. I think it's time to re-question if we actually need to. Do we need all this package of Node.js to build a single page application? I'm not entirely sure now. I'm not entirely sure. I think the technology that we have in the browser, or certainly modern browsers for the vast majority of the people, it's good enough. I think it's good enough, and we can just use simple files. It's very well optimized. You just see how much goes over the wire when you do it this way. And the main thing is the stability. As I mentioned, I have far more confidence that in a decade's time, an approach like this without all of that extra baggage and Node.js and all of that complex build tool, all those complex build tools, and all that machinery. I have more confidence that this will carry on working. This will work just as it works today. So yeah, that's all I wanted to put out there in terms of why I think perhaps 2025 and going into 2026, we need to have a think about whether do we still need Node.js. I'm starting to think perhaps not. Okay, that's all I have to say for now. Goodbye.